So I will go ahead and kick us off and just say good morning and thank you, or good afternoon. I am used to doing these in the morning, our time, Eastern Standard Time, so that good afternoon, everyone. So thanks for being here. We really appreciate it. I'm super excited to be able to present the best practices working with receptive operators. But before we kick off, I'd like to introduce the person that probably everybody on the call knows, Michelle Cota, who's Director of Discover New England. Michelle, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I just want to take a few seconds and sing Carrie's praises for a moment. She has done a fantastic job at lining up experts to speak on very relevant topics for international travel. This specific training in particular is exciting because not only do we have these two guests who serve on national boards and advisory councils here with us, but you can hear directly from them about what makes a successful sales relationship. So we've been seeing in data reports a softening of domestic travel, which is what we've been predicting all along, and which is why we've been racing over the past 2 years to host trainings like this, bring access to these experts who can help get our hospitality industry back into these international distribution channels. So international inbound arrivals, it's a great story right now for New England. In particular, we have been outpacing the national average when it comes to arrivals into Boston and into our 6 states. So this is a tourism sector that our hospitality businesses should always stay involved with, regardless of how strong or weak domestic travel is. And I love that you will get to hear how and why directly from these speakers today, so you don't have to hear it from us. So with that, I thank you, Carrie, again. Great job with this entire program and with the recent webinars that we were able to bring in and those that you have planned moving forward. I'm looking forward to hearing these presentations today. So Carrie, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate the praise. I will say Lena is the one that brought us Quentin, though, so I can't take credit for him. So I appreciate the willingness to work with us. So a couple things for housekeeping for everyone. This training is part of the continuing sessions that we started with the Steps to Success program. That was last December, as many of you will recall. That was with IITA and Alon Tourism. We're working on moving some other things forward with them, so stay tuned for the next steps with that. Next training will be taking place on November 19th, and that'll be a webinar with Vacations to America with Richard Wims. Today is the receptive and hotelier, and that will be the international operator. So it's the two sides to the conversation. So make sure you register for that in advance. I'm going to begin this presentation by introducing our two guests. They'll be speaking for about 30 minutes. And we will have Q&A open throughout. So one of the conversations that we had prior to this was it's easier to answer the questions in the moment. So please, when you have a question, I'll be monitoring that and we'll make sure that we get that question in front of Quentin and Lena and whoever is appropriate to answer. And then also at the end, we'll have about 20 minutes of Q&A. Being a webinar, all of you are hidden. So please, please, please use that Q&A box. Don't be afraid to ask a question. This is being recorded and it will be posted on the Discover New England website. So you can go back to it or you can have others watch it. And I would strongly encourage GMs and rev managers to take notice of some of this conversation. And so with that, I would like to begin by introducing Quentin Blair, who goes by Q or Quentin or Quinn. We discovered he has all kinds of wonderful names that he answers to, and I'll just keep calling him nice things because I spelled his name wrong. Quentin works as the Chief Marketing Officer at Blair Hotels and acts as the General Manager for the Buffalo Bill Village. During the summer months, he holds the prestigious position of Lead Porter. I think that actually sounds like the best job in the house. Quentin is an active board member for several organizations, including Inbound International Travel Association, IITA, the Advisory Council. He's a director on the Wyoming Office of Tourism Board, Park County, Hot Springs County, Bighorn County, Lodging Tax boards, and then the Cody Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. He's also on belongs to several other national and international organizations. In his spare time, Quentin volunteers on the Buffalo Bill Art Show and Sale Committee as the Cody Culture Club. Did I get that right, Quentin? Yeah, I love it. Okay, perfect. And then I'd like to also introduce Lena Ross. Several of you probably met Lena at Summit for Discover New England. She was there last year. Wonderful opportunity to have her kind of a one-on-one with this. Lena is the COO for America for You, a U.S. inbound receptive tour operator based in California, serves as the chair of the board for IITA. She has extensive product experience, and her experience includes working on the supplier side, including major CVBs and the hotel industry. She holds board and committee positions at a volunteer organization dedicated to advancing women through education and charity called Junior League of Orange County. Both of whom are incredibly busy and influential in their communities and nationally. We are so grateful to have them join us today to discuss what makes successful relationships between suppliers and inbound receptives for reaching the international travel company and visitors. I'm getting old. I think I should have made this bigger font. Sorry for the stumbles. And with that, please take it away.
Perfect. All right. I am going to share my screen. Maybe. Are we good?
You are good.
Perfect. Working with inbound operators. And now for those of you who have already gone through kind of the steps to success, some of this may be reiterated information, but we just want to make sure that we're kind of covering everything and giving you the most information that we can. So as Carrie mentioned, please feel free to ask questions and all of that, because that's why we're here. And I wanted to also point out as we're going in, both Quentin and I are family-run businesses. Both of our businesses were started by our parents, and we are now kind of the second generation taking over those businesses, which I know, especially in your guys' region, is kind of a lot of what's going on there with the small B&Bs and all of that kind of thing. So just wanted to point that out. All right, so how does it work? You as a supplier work with an inbound tour operator or ITO, and we work with tour operators overseas who then work with travel agents and all of those kind of things. There are ways that you can work with tour operators directly. I always say, you know, if you're a major hotel in Boston that they're going to be sending hundreds of thousands of room nights to, there is a chance that you'll work directly with a tour operator overseas. But in most cases, if it's going to be trips that are individual travelers or small groups that are going in, or even just one-off groups for things, they'll be working through an ITO to get all of their product, because then it'll work easier for a lot of things, which we will get into in a bit. Quentin, anything about
Yeah,
Yep.
I'd like to point out that in our instance, it's both. We do have major tour operators that we work with overseas, and then we work with dozens of ITOs throughout the state, which gives us access to everybody from those very major high-level companies that do send us thousands of room nights a year, all the way down to the mom and pops that send a couple, but they kind of all add up when they work through the ITOs.
All right, so the booking chain, and this is kind of what makes it more confusing, because people are used to supplier to consumer or even supplier to travel agent. But in working with overseas consumers, it goes through all of these chains. And this is one of the reasons why pricing gets a little more complicated, because of course, each of these sections wants to make a little bit of money on the reservation when it comes to you. And in the end, the consumer doesn't want to be paying hundreds of dollars more for their vacation, but they want to be, they are looking for the best vacation that they can. And we're each giving our knowledge to that, which is where what we're getting paid for. In case it's not clear to you guys, when an international, whether our company specifically works more with Western Europe and Australia and New Zealand, within the ITO world, there are ITOs that focus on South America, the Asian markets, China specific, Japan specific, Middle Eastern, all over the place. So again, my knowledge is a little closer more just to Western Europe, but I can't speak to all of it as chairman and working with the ITOs within the IITA community. But in general, when somebody is coming from overseas to the US, it is, if they're not coming from Mexico and Canada, it is a long flight. They are coming for a longer period of time, and they're not just visiting one destination. So a lot of people think, you know, oh, they can just book through Expedia or just book with me directly. But the thing is, they're not even going to know where they want to stay if they're not advised on how to even explore your region, which is what the tour operator is doing. Because the same thing, a travel agent sells the whole world and isn't necessarily an expert on every region of everything. But if their client comes and says, we want to go to New England, they go to a tour operator who has expertise there, or who sells trips, who works with an ITO that has expertise there, to get them the best trip for their 2 to 3 week vacation to see everything that they want to see.
Well, and America is vastly different when it comes to geography than most of those regions that you mentioned. The notion of you're going to have 220 miles between your third and your fourth night on the itinerary wouldn't be something that would be intuitive to somebody who lived in perhaps the UK. That would take you across 2 countries.
Yep. And even in your region, which is a smaller region, I've gotten requests for things that I'm like, do you know how many states you're crossing over or what you're doing if you're trying to get from point A to point B in one night? That's still not possible. So there's still a lot of education that needs to happen, which is what we are here for.
And when that happens, Lena, I would much rather, if we're being reactive, I'd rather deal with your company than with an OTA. But B, it gives us a chance to be proactive so that you're fielding those questions long ahead of time, educating the consumer and getting them to me in an organized, timely fashion, so that I'm not trying to contact Expedia and deal with a cancellation as my desk is checking in a bunch of people. There's a lot of advantages to having a person that you know and have a relationship with on the other side of that phone, if you will.
Yep. And now, why work with the international travel market? One is the type of clients that you're going to get. They're typically staying longer than Americans. They're spending more money because this is their big major trip of the year. They have budgets that are much more robust. They're also not bringing a cooler into your hotel and just eating packaged lunches, you know, that kind of thing. They are eating in your restaurant. They're spending money in your gift shop. So even though you may be making theoretically a little less, and we'll talk about that later, you're actually getting more out of those clients that are staying. They're also coming at times, since they're coming for a whole week, they're not looking to stay at your hotel on a weekend. Now, of course, if they're coming for 3 weeks, there are 3 weekends in there. But we can kind of manage where they're staying. You know, Boston, maybe it's actually better to stay in Boston over the weekend because it's more of a conference city and they're actually more impacted during the week, and the weekends are a little lighter. And then they're going up into Maine during the week when most Americans aren't traveling. And so then they're filling rooms on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays when you guys need those rooms filled, right?
And again, it's a matter of education and making that work, because the consumer, the end client, they don't want to be in Boston in the middle of a conference, and they don't want to be in Maine when it's overrun with other tourists. So when you're educating them, that's A, beneficial to them, but it's beneficial to me because I can fill in those dates that would otherwise result in lower demand or even a distressed inventory.
Yep. And number two, travel agents. While apparently I just was with somebody and in America, we're calling them travel advisors now. But in Europe, they're still mainly called travel agents. But I was with the American Association of Travel Advisors over last week, and apparently that is one of the fastest growing booking channels for people in America. But in Europe, you will still find brick and mortar travel agencies everywhere, right? You're walking down the high street in London and you will see travel agencies, which means that they are making enough money to pay the rent for a very expensive piece of property. So when people are like, oh, travel agencies aren't really what's happening, they are. And one of the reasons for that is, especially in Europe, a lot of the big markets, Germany, UK, have very strict travel laws that if a client books through a travel agent, they are getting security, they are getting help when needed, right? If something happens on their trip, the travel agent and the tour operator are responsible for fixing it. I think everybody, well, maybe not everybody, I'm probably going to age myself now, but when the volcano erupted in Iceland and flights were grounded for days and all of that, people booked through travel agents / tour operators / ITOs. We were already on the ground getting them extensions on their hotels. Their tour operators were working on getting their flights back. While they still just did their vacation, right? They weren't sitting on a phone talking to anyone. That was all handled for them. And they got to just explore and do their own thing for that vacation. When things happen overseas, the riots in Egypt, people got private planes out there from tour operators to get their clients out. If you were there on your own, you had to figure out how to get on a plane back. So these kind of things are why people, and now they're very rare and all of that, but just in general, the travel agents are there to make sure that, and the European travel laws are there to make sure that these clients are covered. Now, on that side, if you're working with an ITO or a tour operator, you need to make sure that you are communicating with them anything that changes. If you say you have a pool and it's going down for construction for a month, make sure you let people know, because if they get there and the pool isn't working and it was a planned thing that they didn't know about, they can ask for their money back. So that's the one kind of big detail, is make sure you're communicating anything that is going to impact your usual amenities. That isn't an emergency, or like the hot tub battery ran out and it'll be fixed in 24 hours or something like that. That's not a thing. Anything else to add to travel agents, Q?
Well, just kind of to touch on what you're speaking about there, it's part of managing that relationship. And as we get further into it, relationships come up a lot. And so to be the first one on the phone, the first one to let Lena from America for you know that her guests are going to be facing these issues is a good way for me to stand out from my competitive set and to just be helpful in that relationship building.
And the same thing backwards. If my client needs to stay an extra 2 nights, Quentin's going to give me those extra 2 nights over random clients that he doesn't know, because we have a relationship and he knows I'm going to be sending more clients in the future. So my clients are going to get those rooms first, which is the symbiotic relationship. Number 3, diverse markets. Different countries have different needs, and it's very hard as a hotelier or a, destination even, to understand all of the different things that are required. And that's one of the reasons why you work with an ITO, and one of the reasons why tour operators work with an ITO. We know personally as America for You how Europeans travel and the kind of things they're interested in and how much driving they're willing to do and how many nights and the kind of patterns. So when we're creating those itineraries, we're making sure it works for the client. Whereas Japanese tourists travel very differently. Chinese tourists, South American tourists, a lot of South American tourists focus a lot on shopping, as versus other things, a lot of, those kind of things. And so instead of you having to think about that and promote that, we can pick the things out of your property or destination that are what these clients are looking for, and then fit the itinerary to meet those needs.
They also have different travel patterns, which is very helpful. When this market's not strong, the other market might be, and that kind of it helps quite a bit for me to accomplish my goal of mitigating the risks of not being able to sell all of my inventory. So that's when there's a natural disaster or a currency crisis or something going wrong with the government in any of those regions or countries, the others are still there to kind of balance that out and to make sure my demand curve doesn't flatten.
Yep. And just one thing that popped into my mind, we work a lot with Australia and New Zealand. They tend to travel during their summer, which is our winter, right? So they're picking things and traveling kind of a lot of times during our off season. But that's, just like Americans travel during our summer more than other things. That's when they take our longer vacation. Typically, they're doing the same thing. And then FIT versus group, again, those are different needs. FIT, in case anyone wasn't on the Alon thing before I go on, and is usually foreign individual traveler or frequent individual traveler. So it's an independent person, family, or couples, or, traveling in a rental car typically and doing their own vacation that was pre-planned through a tour operator, but they're not in a group setting. But a lot of companies, like Q was mentioning, will think of them as groups because while they're not a bunch of rooms arriving on the same day, they are a bunch of rooms booked with one company that are coming throughout the year. And then bookings for international, again, longer lead time. I am already booking or working on summer 2025. I'm getting lots of reservations. I'm getting requests for 2026, which in America we are not prepared for. But these clients are booking way in advance, and we'll kind of talk about this when it comes to pricing, and Q will speak on it a little more, but you're able to build a base of clientele that is coming, that is already booked way in advance, before you need to start thinking about, other things, and less cancellations. These are, if you see cancellations from international FITs specifically, it's mainly they cancel right away. So they're making their reservations for a year out and something didn't work from the flights. They didn't get the hotels they wanted on their itinerary. So they're canceling the whole thing. But that's happening a year, 9 months out when they're making it. If they're canceling close into the reservation, it's because something has happened. There's a medical emergency. Something happened and they're covered by their travel insurance. So again, they're not looking if they're canceling 14 days, 7 days out for all of their money back because they have travel insurance to cover these situations that are happening, because they're not just canceling on a whim. If I'm a weekend American traveler and I've booked my 3 nights in Boston and it looks like it's going to rain all weekend, or as we've had here in Southern California, it looks like it's going to be 120 degrees, I am going to cancel and maybe not go on my trip. That is not going to happen with the international traveler. They are coming regardless of what your weather looks like, barring what's going on in Florida right now, something major like that. But in general, they're not looking at the inconvenience of not having the best weather possible for their vacation. They're simply traveling because they've booked non-refundable long haul flights and all of those things.
And for me, I think that those 2 points kind of really lead to what I would consider to be maybe the most advantageous piece of taking this international business, and that's that I can be so much more aggressive with regards to my rate management, my yield management as we get closer up, because I've mitigated those risks. I know that you're coming, so then I can turn around and really make my profit off of the Smiths. Whereas if I were in the same position 2 weeks out with 200 rooms left to sell, I wouldn't be nearly as confident in my $329 rate for the transient guest.
Hey, we have a question, you guys, so I just want to throw it in there. It says, could you speak to the shift from full coach tours to smaller group tours, and if there are international markets that may be booking between 10 and 14 rooms versus 20 plus rooms? Anyone?
Yeah. It's harder for me because my company specializes in those smaller group tours, but I will say the shift post-COVID has gone to smaller tours, less of the typical 50 passenger buses. Mainly also because we're seeing people want to travel more to smaller destinations where those buses would not either be welcome or fit. So yes, and my company specifically also works with motorcycle groups, which are typically also 7 to 12 rooms. So smaller groups are becoming more popular. And I'll let Q talk about it from his hotelier standpoint.
Yep, absolutely. We are seeing the same thing, and that's a shift to those smaller groups. Fortunately for us, that could pose quite a few problems. You're seeing one of your major markets kind of shrink. For us, we're in a position where we have relationships with dozens of ITOs as well as those major tour operators that are overseas. So when we see that shift, what we're doing, and it's really not that high level, instead of taking one group, we're taking two. And we're at the same number, and we're moving on basically as if nothing had really changed.
Did that answer your question? Hopefully. If not, throw additional in the chat. But it is, I think, one of the things we're seeing, not only probably from American travelers as we're doing it, but from international, is people are looking for more unique, more out of the way, and to be the ones who are doing something that's different from everyone else. And we're looking at, again, kind of going back to this longer stays and things like that. We're seeing less and less from the, let's say, mature travel markets. So that would be the European travel market. We are seeing people wanting to do less of that. I'm going to hit a bunch of different destinations for one night, overnights going through. Now they're saying, okay, we're still traveling for 2 to 3 weeks, but we would actually like to only do Massachusetts and Vermont rather than the entire New England region in that time, and spend more nights in each of the locations. So that's kind of great. But I will say that for the less mature markets where they're just trying to hit the highlights, you will still see more of those larger bus tours that are doing the kind of one night, one night, one night to give people that experience of America.
And both of those segments will have their own distinct set of advantages as well as kind of hurdles that you have to overcome. Certainly when we check in two of the smaller groups that are going to stay for 4 nights, this will speak to the GMs in the crowd. That's a much better mix for us in terms of our staffing, our needs, what we're spending. It results in a higher return on investment. We're not having to send housekeepers in every night. It changes it for the positive. Whereas the bigger groups, we need those. We do need those one-night stays to come in and kind of fill in our existing inventory and to move on. So both are advantageous. It's just a matter of kind of, again, being diversified and able to handle both of those and having both of those on our radar and our roster.
And for those of you that are in smaller properties that maybe aren't looking for large groups as well, that this shift towards smaller groups helps you guys. And of course, the FIT is going to be your main like bread and butter. If you're like in a 20 room or less hotel or B&B with 5 rooms, you can still work in this market and you can still work with ITOs. You're just going to want to shift towards people who are more focused on FIT and small group rather than the large ones. Again, YQ, and he says he works with a lot of different people, and you'll have that opportunity when you look at what markets you're interested in. Do you think you're mainly looking at Western Europe? Do you think you're mainly looking at Asia? Pick the ITO and the tour operators that are focusing on those regions. And then same thing, are you looking for mainly FIT? Maybe you're working with the smaller, more boutique style Receptive like America for You. Are you looking for big bus tours? ATI is going to be more of what you're looking for because they do their own bus programs and they do those large things, and that's where you can get into that market. So, and here's just a small side on the benefits of working with an ITO. You're working with one ITO that's in America. They work with 50 or so tour operators overseas who work with 5,000 travel agencies who have 25,000 travel agents who have 250,000 potential clients. So instead of trying to reach each of those consumers on your own, which is a very costly thing, especially in Europe, you're working with one company or a couple of companies in the US that are going to get you to those clients without you doing a majority of the work. And I'm going to go to the next slide because I forget if this is part of it or not, but if it's not, I'm going to come back to this and kind of talk a little more about why working with an American company and an ITO makes sense. Nope, see, I was already on my... So why work with an ITO as versus tour operators overseas directly or try to go to these consumers directly? You are able to communicate in English with an American company. That's step one. You know, we're working with France, Germany, Italy, and we usually have staff, or the ITOs usually have staff, Japan, China, that speak those languages to talk to those operators. You don't have to do that. You're working with somebody who speaks English. Time zones. Yes, I'm in California, and Quentin's in Wyoming, and you guys are on the East Coast, which is why we're having a 12 o'clock webinar, so I didn't have to wake up at 5 a.m. But in general, you're talking to people who are within your time zone. And then if there's an issue when the client is checking in at 4 p.m. and you don't have a credit card on file or something's not, you can't find your front desk staff can't find the room, you can call somebody in America who is still up and has their office running, and you're not trying to deal with a company in Europe where everybody's gone to sleep, or in Australia where they're not even awake yet. Promotion. We'll talk about this. Oh, I'm repeating myself. Okay. We'll talk about this a little bit when it comes to pricing, but one of the big things I want you to get out of this is when you're doing those commissions and discounts, or, you know, creating those rates, don't think of it as a discount. This is your marketing spend. If you're used to spending $5,000 to put an ad in AAA magazine, this is the same thing. You're just not paying for that advertising until a client is physically booking with you. We are doing our own marketing for you. We're paying to go to trade shows. We're paying to be at places. I'm about to travel to London to promote all of the products that we work with to tour operators, and that's what we're paying for on your behalf. And part of what your commission to us goes to help supplement, of course. And those tour operators are creating either really, really fancy websites, or some of them are still creating printed brochures that are going out, flyers, all of those kind of things. These are advertising things that are going out on your behalf that you are not paying anything for until a client physically makes that booking. And I always tell people, while there are a lot of people who book through travel agencies, and that's why this all works, there are still those people who walk into a travel agency, pick up a brochure, and they might book direct. But they're also only, if they're using that, they're going to book the hotels and the itineraries that are in those travel agency brochures. And that's how they're going to find Quentin's properties in Cody versus other ones and still book them direct. But so you got free advertising there. It's a one-stop shop, and this is kind of on both ends. You guys have somebody to deal with in terms of any issues that comes up, payment, all of that. And the same thing for the tour operator. When their clients on a 14 to 21 day itinerary that they've booked exclusively through America for You, they don't have to talk to 14 different hotels and try to figure all of this out. They talk to one person and they get all of that information at once. And our company also, hold on just a second. Our company also does activities and those kind of things. So they have one company to deal with for all of that rather than try to piece it out. Quentin.
Just a couple of things before we get too far down the line and my points aren't really relevant. When you mentioned putting an ad in AAA, if I do that, it's going to, my money's spent. So I've thrown my dart. I sure hope I hit the board. But if I don't, that money's spent. When I work with an ITO, as you mentioned, I'm only paying when you give me the booking. So it's risk-free. If you don't book, then I'm not really out anything. Another point to it is if I'm going to put an ad in AAA magazine, I'm going to need to design an ad. Am I good at designing ads? Can I guarantee that my ad is going to be one that really speaks to consumers, let alone reaches them? What if I end up in a bank of ads at the end of the book with every other ad that's in my region? How do I have any guarantee that mine's going to stand out? So you lose some risk there. On top of that, it's much easier for me to track my return on investment when I've used an ITO because it's right there. It's been booked by you. I can see the booking all the way through. I can add all those up, and I can have a very definitive answer on what my ROI actually looks like. Good luck. And I don't mean to pick on AAA, they're a great organization, but in any magazine that I end up in, I've got to, if I am indeed interested in tracking that ROI and putting a number to it, I've got to get creative with QR codes or a phrase to say when booking, and then I have to count on my line level employees to track that all the way through. It just turns into kind of a whole ball of yarn. And if I could have you go back just one slide real quick. We're fortunate enough to work with dozens of ITOs. So think what that multiplication looks like when I'm reaching 250,000 clients dozens of times with different ITOs. On top of that, I don't have to go to Europe to have these meetings. I can have 8 of them at a trade show in the same afternoon.
Yep. And kind of along what Quentin was saying, and we'll again try FIT contracts or group contracts. We're more focused on FIT, which is why this is in here, but group contracts, same thing. But again, like Quentin said, your investment into this to get it started is really just filling out that contract. So the time it takes you to figure out your rates, fill out the contract, is the only time spent that you've done. And if, again, nothing comes of this and you get 0 bookings, that's literally, you spent 2-3 hours, I don't know, filling out this contract. That's it. Right? Again, kind of US currency, that's what we're going to work with you in. That's what we're going to pay you in, obviously. And you don't have to think about what is happening in Europe with their currencies and how it's, how the euro's doing versus the US dollar and all of those kind of things. You are just dealing with your regular currency with an American company, and how you're going to get that payment from euros to, we deal with all that. We put that kind of buffer into what we're charging to cover those bank fees and do all of that, and you're just doing your normal thing. You have a local contact. Again, if there's an issue, if there is anything, you have somebody local to talk to. And you're also committing to an American company. And again, you have a lot of choices with ITOs and all of that. But if you're working with ones that are part of IITA or that Discover New England are saying, these are good ITOs to work with, you're also working with companies that are vetted, that are probably not going to go out of business on a whim, right? Whereas we're the ones taking the risk with the overseas companies, making sure that we're vetting them, that they are companies that are going to pay and all of that. And let's say a company doesn't pay me. I am still paying you because my relationship with you matters, and I'm going to deal with whatever happens there. Whereas if you took group X from some random tour operator or travel agent somewhere, or even just guy who wants to do his family reunion out of Japan and you don't know him, you're taking the risk that if he doesn't show up or if he doesn't pay you, you're never getting that money. Whereas with the ITO, you're getting that payment.
Good luck in international court for a claim of $2,000.
Yes. High ROI. We'll kind of talk about this, I think, when we go into pricing, and Q can speak more on that. And again, the security, like what I was talking about, you're covered working with an American company. Any questions on this particular slide?
No questions on this slide in particular. I think there's a couple for the next slide though, so I'm excited for that. And we have about 15 minutes left. Just
Okay.
heads up.
Rush through it. Okay, contracting and rates. Again, I'm going to try to go over this pretty high level, and anyone can always reach out later, as this is a lot of info, but I see a lot of hotels that give me one rate for the whole year because they're like, oh, we're just going to do this. To maximize what you're getting out of this, you should look at your high season, low season, all of that. And most ITOs, I would say all, will do weekday, weekend rates, peak, shoulder versus off season rates, all of those kind of things. So make sure you're doing your homework when you're filling out a contract so that you're getting the best opportunity to get yourself set up for success. And most operators will work with blackout dates, premium rates. There is a conference coming up. July 4th always sells out. We know these things. The types of contracting. Most people are used to static contracting. That's what's been in the industry for a very long time. And it still is one of the best ways to get yourself in a fly drive package overseas, because it's hard to package anything if half of the hotels are on dynamic rates and you can't say this package will probably cost $1,200 because you don't know. So again, it depends on what you're looking for and how you do things internally, but static contracting is still a thing. But dynamic contracting is also coming up more and more. You can connect, different ITOs have different connections, and you can do your dynamic contracting. And the types of contracting. Free sale means that the ITO can sell as many rooms as they want on a specific day until you send a blackout. So that's one way of working together. That's usually the easiest if you have a lot of different contracts. You just say, here's what you can do. Some will even stipulate, it can't be more than 5 rooms on a given day or something like that. And then you send everyone blackouts at once when a date has gotten to a certain occupancy level. Allotment, you say a number of rooms that they can sell on a particular day without contacting you, and then you give blackouts at the time of contracting, like July 4th or Labor Day weekend. And on request, which is where you give the rate and the rooms that you have, but the ITO has to ask you before selling it. So you'll get an email saying, do you have this room available on this date? While America for You is a company that does work like this, there are a lot of ITOs that do not allow this type of thing. So again, depending on the kind of hotel you are and what you're looking for, always ask. One thing I will say is this works really well for B&Bs, small properties with a lot of different room types where setting up free sale or allotment doesn't make any sense. It does not work very well for chains or large hotels where the client can just go online and be like, I see that you have rooms available. Why can my travel agent not just confirm this to me? Right? So if you are a small property, don't be scared that you have to do free sale or allotment. You may not be able to work with all of the ITOs, but you can work with ITOs that are willing to do on request, and it will be a good fit for you. But it's not necessarily for the Holiday Inn that has 400 rooms and should really be able to do either a free sale or allotment. And I'm going to let Q take over real quick. Oh, we might have a question.
Well, I'm just thinking ahead for some questions or some conversations I've been having with folks. What are the consequences of being too restrictive on the blackout dates? Are there any?
So that is kind of the first thing I would speak to. Our company's philosophy is that we don't say no unless we have to. So if the date is blacked out, meaning for us, it's that we really can't sell any more rooms, we would be much more likely to offer a premium rate. An example of that would have been the Eclipse. Why say no if you don't have to? If you can still end up with the same yield at the end of the day, I would encourage you to offer the premium rates and take with it all of those advantages that we've discussed earlier, rather than saying no and relying on that OTA. When it comes to types of contract pricing, Blair Hotels is exclusively static. And the reason being, dynamic costs money. It takes software to do that. It takes connectivity. There's a lot of changes that have to happen. I've been willing to do that as soon as the industry on the other side of the table tells me that that's something that they're looking for. But to this point, everybody's been very happy with a static rate. I suppose there might be a few instances where the advantages would outweigh the disadvantages. But for us, in the way that we do business, we'll get into it in just a second, static seems to work better for us. And then when we talk about types of contracting, free sale does carry with it some risk. So if you have this discounted rate out there and all of a sudden tour company A sells 100 of your rooms at that discounted rate, you've really lost your opportunity to then maximize your revenue on those other markets. On request tends to be a little bit cumbersome, especially for the industry. Lena's mentioned that she's more of a higher level, a boutique type operator, so they're willing to deal with that. Most aren't. It's just too cumbersome, and the phone calls back and forth really erode a lot of those advantages that we had. Allotment can be made to fit in most every scenario. An example of that, we have a property, it's called the Ranch at Ucross. It's 31 guest rooms. Each night it will host one motor coach, be it a 25-room motor coach or a 12-room motor coach, because we're trending towards those smaller groups. But I have an allotment out with all of my ITOs and overseas travel agents. I probably have 140 rooms for sale through those allotments. And as I get closer and closer to my number, I can begin to black out this date and that, or this company and that company, and really kind of narrow in on that sweet spot of selling my 31 rooms exactly without having the risk of a free sale or the cumbersomeness of on request and having to have that back and forth each time.
And I was going to say, in terms of the blackouts, I mean, we all know there are certain dates that you may just know you're going to sell out. I would agree with Q. premium pricing. Again, if you know that you sell July 4th at $500 a night, then use that as your starting point when you're pricing out and give that price for those dates. I do get a lot of questions from hotels that are like, we want to work with you, but we want to black out the whole summer. So again, think about this as a relationship. You want me to send you clients during your need periods, but you don't want to sell anything during your peak time period. And that's not really a relationship. That's, and it makes it hard for a tour operator who, again, while you know that we want to push the shoulder seasons, and again, a lot of those travelers, especially couples and all of that, are getting more savvy about traveling in April rather than June, July, and August, because they don't want to deal with all of that either. But you've got families that you're selling to. If they can't put a package in and they're spending all the money to do the advertising and all of that, and then they can never sell the month of July for this package, they're not going to put either that hotel in as an option for that package, or they're not going to sell that destination no matter how much Discover New England wants to be in that brochure. But it is a back and forth. The one thing I will tell people when we get into pricing, you can be a little more flexible. I mean, we know that perhaps on a weekend in July, you're only going to offer a 10% commission off of your rack rates. And that's not ideal, but I'd rather have a room to sell at a price that is not going to extremely be too expensive for the customer overseas, especially when it's packaged, than to just be told I can't sell July and August at all. And then you can give a 30% off during the time periods that you're really looking for those rooms, rather than just say no. All right, we only have 9 minutes left. So let's go calculating the net rate. So your rack rate is 100% of what you're making. For example, $100. It's your published retail rate. The consumer theoretically should always pay the same rate, whether buying directly from the supplier or through this booking chain. A travel agent, everybody's used to this, 10% commission. So you make $90 on a $100 room because they're getting a 10% commission. If you're going directly to an overseas tour operator, they generally want 20% because they still need to pay that travel agent their 10% commission. And then an ITO is usually 25% to 30%. And as you can see, we actually make the smallest amount in the commission chain. Most ITOs are only adding about 5% to 7% on top of your room price so that the tour operator has the 10% that they want and the travel agent has the 10% that they want. So the $75 off of your $100 gets to $75, and that's your net rate that you're going to be contracting. So you don't actually pay a commission or do any of that. It's just a new price. This also helps you in terms of like figuring out your taxes, all of that. It goes off of the net rate. There are instances where there's a discount and you still pay the same taxes, ranches, and all of that. If anyone is in that situation, I'm happy to talk more with you about that. But in general, most hotels and activities charge everything. They just consider the $75 the price, and then charge taxes and all of that on top of that. And I'm going to go to the next slide, and Quentin's going to talk more about how he prices and how this looks from a hotelier standpoint.
So before I really get into how we do it differently, I would note that 25% discount, if you're an independent hotel, that's the same or slightly less than you're going to end up paying an OTA when that inventory is distressed anyways. So you're getting all of the advantages we've spoken of without having to deal with the Expedias and the Booking.coms of the world, of which they're useful as distressed inventory, but otherwise I don't want my business on their site. I don't want to be selling at a discount. I don't want my day of consumer to be seeing that as a discount, it's just a much worse position to be in. So on this slide, I like it a little bit better. It's easier for me to explain what we kind of refer to as, Lena had mentioned that we are in fact a family business. My predecessor in this role was actually my mother. And so we called this the Judy Blair Bass-Ackwards Plan for Wholesale Business. And we really look at it from the opposite end of the spectrum. So we begin with the rate that we're going to give the supplier rather than the rate that we hope to garner from the consumer. I'm not entirely willing to give away all the secret sauce, but I will say that your RevPAR is a good relationship to look at. Not saying that you should set it higher than your RevPAR, but it should have a relationship with your RevPAR. And as your RevPAR goes up, it gives you an opportunity to forecast differently. So we begin with the rate that we want to give the suppliers that it makes sense for us
The
and is a
ITOs.
profitable.
The ITOs, you're the
ahead.
supplier.
Yes, sorry.
Yep,
We go
you're
with
starting
the-
here at the ITO
Yeah.
level. Yes.
So we are the supplier. We give our rate to the ITO, and that's the rate that we're profitable. It makes sense for us to have this business. We have 350 rooms. Our town is a town of 10,000. We're on the border of Yellowstone. We are extremely overbuilt for our market without the aid of the group industry. So we begin with that price, and we go up as we get closer to that consumer. And a lot of times that'll result in, instead of in this example, by the time that we've put enough of our inventory into that sold category, by the time we get to the consumer, we might be able to get $100, $105, $110 for that same room. And we're using this $100 example. So for us, the bedrock of our business is this group travel industry. And from there, we go up and we're in an on-demand pricing structure. And so we're willing to charge the consumer whatever the market will bear. For us, that means selling about 60% of our inventory to group travel, whether it's FIT, motor coach, something else, and then building up towards that high demand scenario where we have the consumers coming in who are booking 3 weeks out, a month out, and we're able to charge them a much higher rate than perhaps we had imagined by discounting. So we are a bit backwards in the way that we do it, but we've been doing group business for 38 years now, and it's been very beneficial to our model.
And I will also second that because I hear a lot of times, especially from smaller businesses or activity providers, that they can't give those commissions because it would eat into their profit or make it unprofitable. So the way the Blair company does it, of making sure that the ITO price that they're starting with is enough to give them profit and cover all of their business expenses, and working up from there gets them to be able to actually make sure they're never selling at a loss per se, that everything's always making profit, just slightly lower profit from an ITO. But again, some of those benefits that we were talking about, longer stay, bigger spend, all of that helps mitigate some of that as well. Carrie, do we have a question or?
We've got a couple actually, and so we're actually at time, but if
Okay.
people are willing to stay and kind of keep going, let's give it a couple more minutes if that's okay with you and Quentin. So one, what are the pros and cons of setting up a static agreement directly with a tour operator versus working with an established tour company like America for You or Tour Mappers?
So I would say the biggest thing is a lot of those tour operators won't want to set up a contract with you unless, again, you're a really big hotel that they see sending a lot of business to. And it's again that whole, if you're going to get more out of your one contract if you're contracting with an ITO who has a lot of different partners rather than one company who's not. Now, I will say that's kind of different if we're talking groups. If someone comes to you specifically for a group contract and says, we have this group that's happening, that makes sense. But as an FIT, and the other thing is, if you do that, you really want to make sure that you're paying attention to this pricing structure and not giving that tour operator more than 20%. It doesn't benefit you at all to give that tour operator the same price as what you're giving Tour Mappers, America for You, ATI. All you're doing is shooting yourself in the foot and making one company have something that's much cheaper than everyone else. But if I'm a client who only books through tour operator B, even if tour operator A has a cheaper price, all that's going to happen is they're just not going to go to that area. They're going to go somewhere else. They're going to book a different hotel. They're going to do something else. It's not going to make you more attractive in the market. It's just going to make one tour operator have a cheaper price than everyone else.
Great, great way to
And
put that. Go ahead,
to
Quinn.
add on to that, the volume has to be there for it to be viable to go directly with a client. And I guess my answer to that, when it comes to one versus the other, is if you have the volume and it makes sense, but you're also needing to fill the rooms in our example, basically any way that you can, why not have both?
Okay. Interesting. All right, great. So then the next question, actually, Quentin, stay on my screen because you're going to be the next question. We talked a lot about the accommodations, right? And mentioned attractions. How important is it to have attractions where you are? So Quentin, where you are, I know you have like the outfitter, you have things that you can work with. Is it important to be able to, for you, sell activities to go along with your pricing as a package? And Lena, for you, is how important is it to make sure you've got attractions or things to do around those hotels to make the sale better, I guess?
So for me, it goes back to, we want to capture that longer staying, higher spending business. And you're not going to stay in Cody for 3 nights if all you can do while you're here is twiddle your thumbs. So it behooves us to put those attractions towards the forefront. If we want to contract them, that's one thing. If you're not set up for that, that's also fine. Put those attractions in touch with your ITOs and let them do the heavy lifting for you.
Yep. And I would echo that. I mean, the big thing is again, we think so. When you're talking about marketing internationally, you're marketing an entire region, you're marketing a whole trip, and it has to have things to do. And within your town, Cody, Wyoming is right next to Yellowstone National Park. So why are people staying in Cody versus in Yellowstone, or in Cody versus other destinations? And part of it is where they're located. They're on a perfect driving time basis of what people want to do. So go Cody, Wyoming. But also they have things in town that make them more attractive than staying in a town half an hour further, because they have the Cody Night Rodeo, they have the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, they have these things, and they use them to make Cody more attractive than staying at the town half an hour. I mean, that's the biggest thing that I think as a region you guys look at, and as destinations and as hotels, find those areas that are 3 to 4 hours away from you and partner with them as itineraries to say, like, you can go here and here and here and here, because your only competition when it comes to international, it's not you versus Boston, because they're going to fly into Boston regardless. It's you versus whoever is half an hour away from you, because they're going to do those 3 to 4 hour drives every night. They're probably not going to drive an hour to then overnight again, right? They're going to drive 3 to 4 hours to their next overnight, stay there. So what you can do to make yourself more unique to the towns that are directly surrounding you will help you market more effectively.
That's great.
I do also, when it comes to attractions, ITOs that are not doing groups do want to know about museums and all of those kind of things, but they probably don't sell them if it's not in like a museum pass, like a city pass or something like that. But we do work with hiking outfitters, biking, food tours, city tours, all of those kind of things. I always tell people when you're contracting with an ITO and you have an activity, think about if you were going to travel to Europe, what you would pre-reserve. Those are the kind of things that I, as an ITO dealing with individual travelers, want to contract with, because stuff that has a specific start time that's liable to sell out, those kind of things are what people will pre-book. I need to know what museums, Buffalo Bill Cody Center of the West, is why they want to stay in Cody. But most likely those clients are going to just book that museum when they get to Cody, right? They're just going to walk up and buy the tickets because that's what makes sense, right? They're not pre-reserving that 9 months out.
So Lena, another question that just came in is, how would you identify what ITOs to contract with as an attraction? The example on here is they are a food tour. So how would they figure out who's the right ITO to fit what they do?
Again, it would be just looking at, first of all, what markets you want to go into. If it's Western Europe and you think that's going to be the best fit for your business, then narrow down the ITOs for that. And then also just talk to, not every ITO does contract activities. So that's the other thing, at least for FITs. Again, for groups, it's slightly different because they do the whole package for the group itself, but those are also contracted on a one-off basis. America for You does contract activities, and so do a lot of other operators, but not all of them do. So narrowing it down that way. Part of the benefits of like working with Discover New England is they can also help. They can see from their ITO profiles, and they're part of IITA. They can kind of help negotiate, narrow down. You know, if you can say, I'm looking for this specific international market and I need ITOs that sell activities, they can say, here are the 4 from the IITA website that list that as what they do. And then go from there.
Great. So I'll be.
I would also, Pamela, I would also encourage you to understand that it goes both ways. So as we, a hotel, are looking to identify those activities that will make a difference for our ITOs to book with us, you should also be looking for a hotel that can partner with you. And what's the common link? It's going to be your destination marketing organization. So you want to identify the ITOs that are doing business in that area so that you can then kind of garner some of that business. So have conversations with your DMO, have conversations with your hotel. The ITOs that they are booking the most are going to represent the most potential volume for your model as well.
Yeah. Perfect. So 2 more questions since we're on it, right? This one said, good answers, thank you. There was a push to ensure that FIT rates were in parity between operators, but given the multiple channels available directly to the consumer OTAs, is that even possible now? That's a really good question.
I would still
Yes,
say
it's possible.
yes.
I love the smile from Quentin.
It's possible, but it's work. There's no way to kind of sugarcoat that. We have to monitor our rates. We have to pay attention when there are bad actors that are abusing either the relationship or the OTAs are selling our rooms for less than we would prefer that they do. We put a stop to that. The other kind of aspect of it is going to be on day of, sometimes you're going to have distressed inventory that will need to go to an OTA. At that point, if you need to discount that inventory, it really helps to have a relationship with your ITO and to hope that they're understanding that you're not actually competing with their business, which booked months and months out. This is distressed inventory today. You have to do what you have to do in order to fill your hotel, your attraction, etc.
Right. Lena,
Yeah,
anything?
I was going to say the biggest thing with rate parity is not that last minute. No international travelers checking the hotel's website the day they arrive to check what the price is that you're selling it for. That's not what they're talking. They're looking at whatever when they're making the reservation 9 months out. if they can go on all of these websites, and most of them, again, don't even do this, but it's more at that time of sale to make sure that they're not being oversold. The other thing I would say is, depending on who you work with, to check how they are selling and who they're selling to. All of the operators that we work with and that we sell to package their stuff. So even though we need this rate, because again, we can't have a package that costs 50% more going through a tour operator, travel agent than it would if you bought it all individually. We also, they don't have a way of checking that. And if this rate is lower than what your online rate is at that time, there's no way for anyone to see that, because it's in a package of this entire trip costs $2,000, not each individual hotel costs
It's not lined
100,
up.
100, 100, 100.
Yep.
And
So-
ITOs are for building your base business. OTAs are for moving your distressed inventory. There's no way you should have a deeply discounted rate on an OTA 9 months out during the ITO booking window.
Great. So there was one more question. So how do museums benefit from the ITOs and even going to something like the Discover New England Summit Conference?
Again, we need to know that you're there, and we need to, because a town is not going to get the business if there's nothing to do in the town, as Quentin mentioned. So it may not be that you're getting business directly from that source, as in I'm booking museum tickets, but I'm spreading the word. And when our tour operators who also go to the Discover New England conference are setting up their websites and doing, hey, this is the tour that you're going on, and we're staying in Cody, Wyoming, and one of the things you can do there is Buffalo Bill, Cody, Center of the West. They're not necessarily selling tickets to Buffalo Bill, Center of the West, but part of when they're marketing that whole itinerary, they're saying you're staying here and here are the cool things you can do while you're there.
Yeah.
And that's how your marketing is coming from that as a museum. And again, a lot of people do groups and FITs. So for those group trips, they're going to want to have you built into their packages. So it's a little bit of both on that end.
Yeah.
Hopefully
We
that
also
makes sense.
talk about creating something that is unique, or, creating a different experience that could be a pre-sold ticket versus just a museum entrance ticket. And okay, good. I'll take that as that's the right
Yep.
thing to be
I was
saying.
gonna say that's another thing. If you have at 8 a.m. every day, we can do a private behind the scenes tour that lasts 2 hours, but we only sell 10 tickets. That's something an ITO can actually put and sell. If they're getting something, and I always want to, when you're looking at all this pricing, we have $100. If your museum ticket costs $10, start doing the math on how much money an ITO is going to make on selling your ticket. It becomes too much work for the profit on that. I would say most people draw the line at activities or things that cost $40 maybe as what makes sense financially to sell, just for you too. It's too much busy work and too much stuff for 50 cents profit on that end. But that's not to say they're not promoted and needed and the information is needed.
Yeah, 100%. Fantastic. Thanks. How about, so I hate to say it, 15 over. You want to just do a quick wrap
Yeah,
up?
I was going to say this last slide is important. The one thing I would note, and I'm going to try to be as quick as possible, is this is not a business where if you sign a contract today, rooms are going to come in tomorrow, as Quentin mentioned. It can take 2 to 3 years to really see any business. If you're signing a contract now for summer of 2025, you still may not really see a lot of bookings for summer 2025. That's because we still need to promote your product to our tour operators who promote it. So signing a contract now may mean that you're really going to not see much business from this until summer 2026, summer 2027, or I keep saying summer, but just in general, 2026, 2027. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't start now, because the longer you wait to sign these contracts, the longer it pushes out. So if you sign a contract with an ITO when you need business, you're too late. You want to sign it 2 to 3 years before you think business is going to be needed, and start that process now. So this is not a easy fix for things that are happening immediately.
Yeah. And I will say that in New England, there are certain categories of product that we are still lacking. And there are instances where people have signed up same year and already received business because that category of hotel was wanted or whatever it may be. So there are some, one-offs to go along with that. But Lena, you're 100% right. We always look at, how is the business going to be coming in? And it's not a tomorrow thing. It is definitely a future set of business.
And like I said,
And
it's talking to your whole area, because if you are the only hotel in Vermont that has signed a contract with an ITO, it's really hard to do a Vermont itinerary. So how is anybody coming to you? But if you're talking to the place, if you create an itinerary that you think would be really nice for a 2-week trip, and you talk to the places along the way, and you get at least one hotel from all of those destinations, you now have a product to sell.
Yep. Quentin, why is it important for you to stay in the contract even if you're domestically super busy at the moment? Or projecting to be busy?
so yeah, we saw that with COVID. Domestic travel, especially to the national parks, went absolutely through the roof. And during the COVID cycle, we went from good year to good year and strength to strength, and all was well. But we didn't let those relationships kind of fade into the background. We took care of our partners. We kept all of the relationships, if not all of the agreements, in place. And now, as we're starting to see that domestic demand wane a little bit, coming out of COVID, had we abandoned all of those relationships, we would have a massive COVID hangover. Instead, what happened was we saw the uptick in international travel, which allowed us to be more aggressive with our rate and yield management towards that domestic transient travel. And in 2024, we've had our, again, strongest season one more time. If those relationships would have been abandoned, we would be scrambling right now to put them all on the books. Instead, we're charging the transient traveler record rates, and I guess kind of laughing all the way to the bank, because we had the foresight to know that these relationships were important yesterday and they'll be important again tomorrow.
Well said, Quentin. Thank you. Oh, look at that. I think we're done. Thank you both so much for this. I think it's been absolutely tremendous. And the way I can tell you it's been tremendous is at 1 o'clock, we only lost about 4 people from participating or watching. So thank you so much for all of your questions and answers, and how open and honest you were about the industry and what's kind of needed. So I really do appreciate both of you very, very much. And then I would just like to close this out with a reminder for folks that the next one coming up is Best Practices Working with an International Tour Operator with Richard Wims, Managing Director of Vacations to America. January, we'll be doing kind of the state of international travel, and we'll have TTM that represents the UK, Woodstock that represents Ireland, and Get It Across that represents Germany on there, talking about kind of how's it going and what the future is looking like. February, we're working on putting together a webinar about best practices in familiarization tours and media visits, which are super duper important in all of this. And then, of course, in March, we have How to Summit, because Summit will be right there in April. And if you're a supplier and you haven't signed up for Summit, you may want to look at it because it's actually filling up quite quickly. So again, Lena, Quentin, thank you so very much. It was a pleasure to work with you guys this morning. And Quentin, hopefully maybe one of these days I'll actually get to meet you in person versus just on the screen. Lena, we'll see you in April.
Come to IITA Summit.
Okay, perfect.
Check.
Michelle?
But I was also just going to say real quick, I know people are dropping off, but as people listen to the webinar as well, I am also happy to answer any questions directly you can get my email address from Carrie and Michelle, and I'm happy to talk one-on-one with anyone about questions, even if they're relating to other ITOs and different things or other markets that I'm not used to, and direct you and help you find the right partners to work with.
Perfect. We do actually have one that I'm going to connect you with her after this is over that came in the middle. So thank you for saying that. Really appreciate it. And again, thank you so much for being a part of today.
Thanks for the chance to talk with you.
Thanks.